Welcome everyone to the college landscape in the time of COVID-19. This is a 1-hour webinar organized by Yonkers Partners in Education, or YPIE, which is based in the city of Yonkers here in Westchester County, New York. I'll be your moderator for the next hour. My name is Jacques Steinberg, and I'm so pleased that more than 150 of you have registered for this discussion. Many of those on the call are volunteer mentors from YPIE, as well as college partners of the organization. And in a few moments, we'll be joined by Sam Wallis, the executive director of YPIE. But for those of you who are new to the organization, I'll hope you will indulge me for a moment. I just want to tell you briefly a little bit about it and the excellent work that it does. YPIE believes that post-secondary success is key to creating meaningful and lasting improvements in the quality of life for students and the communities where they live. Readiness for, access to, and persistence in college are essential to escape the cycle of poverty. YPIE's mission is that it partners with students to ensure they are ready for, enroll in, and complete college. It also confronts the challenges of a low-income urban school district by providing families with equitable access to the critical tools and services necessary for college success. One data point from the city of Yonkers is that only 30% of the adults in Yonkers ages 25 or older have a bachelor's or advanced degree. And as you'll hear from Sam a bit later, YPIE is already putting a dent in those figures. I've had the privilege to meet many of YPIE's mentors and staff in person, but for those on the call who I've not met, I was a longtime national education correspondent at the New York Times, where my focus was on college access, readiness, and success. I wrote a book called The Gatekeepers, about a year in a college admissions office. For the last 7 years, I've been on the senior management team of a college access organization called Say Yes to Education, where we are big fans of YPIE. And for the last 3 years, I've been on the board of the National Association for College Admission Counseling, or NACAC. NACAC is a national association of 15,000 college professionals. Our president is Jayne Fonash, and I'm very pleased on behalf of YPIE and NACAC that Jayne will be joining us today, and I'll be introducing you to her in a moment. Before we dive into our discussion, I just want to offer some high-level objectives that we as panelists see as framing our discussion today. But please know you'll have an opportunity to ask plenty of questions, and you may send us in directions that we hadn't anticipated. But just as some framing, we certainly see, we hope in the span of our time together, we can describe the challenges that students from underserved communities like Yonkers face on an even more precarious path to college amid this pandemic. We hope to provide general insights into the current college admissions landscapes, and we hope to share resources available to support high school juniors in particular, and seniors, and their parents and counselors. I would add one more objective to that list, which is that we hope we can provide you with a sense of reassurance. I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish. I know that the times we're living in are serious and in many cases quite dangerous. But I would argue that the bedrock principles of the college admissions process will remain intact this summer and fall, and that the folks who do this work, college admissions officers, college counselors, organizations like YPIE, NACAC, and Say Yes, we're all here as resources for you to figure this all out together. And that for the volunteer mentors on the call, everything you know about this college admissions process, everything you've learned about it, is still going to be brought to bear by you in the midst of this unusual college admissions year. It's still relevant. It's still important. In terms of our agenda for today, in a moment, I'm going to introduce Sam and Jayne. They're going to each spend 10 to 12 minutes sort of providing us some grounding for our discussion, and then we will turn to your questions. You will notice at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A box. If you click in it, please, as Jayne and Sam are speaking and questions come to mind, please put your questions in the question box. I will do my best to read as many of them as possible during our Q&A period, the last 20 minutes or so of our discussion. For those questions we don't get to, Sam and Jayne and the folks at YPIE and I will do our best to answer them offline for you over the next couple of days. Also, this broadcast will be recorded and will be made available to you, as will some of the slides. So let me turn now to introduce our two panelists very, very briefly, and then I will turn the program over to them. Jayne Caflin Fonash, as I mentioned to you, is the president of NACAC. She's been the president of NACAC since the fall of 2019. If you're a NACAC member on this call, you know that she has had arguably the most eventful presidency in the organization's history, and that was even before the pandemic. For more than 2 decades prior to becoming president of NACAC, Jayne was a college counselor in the Loudoun County, Virginia public schools. She also has a background in mental health, and she's currently an independent education counselor. Sam Wallis joined YPIE in 2015 as its chief program officer and was the architect of the YPIE Scholars, the YPIE Fellows, and the YPIE College Success Program. He is also an alumnus of the Teach for America program. And with that, Sam, I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for being with us, especially to Jacques and Jayne, who have been with us prepping and providing a steady hand to all of us as we're tackling the current environment around college admissions. Again, my name is Sam Wallis. I'm the executive director of YPIE. And I want to just share a little bit about what we're hearing from students, what we're hearing from colleges. In preparing for today, we brought together the whole YPIE staff, all 24 members of the YPIE team, to share what they're hearing in their direct work with students and their relationships with college admissions and with the high schools in Yonkers, because a big part of the work we do is in the public schools in Yonkers. And although some of what you'll hear is Yonkers specific, what we're going to be sharing are practices that hopefully are applicable outside of Yonkers with students across the state and hopefully the country as they're tackling this. So we'll put up the slide. As Jacques mentioned, we really target college readiness, college access, and college persistence. And you can see a little bit of data that we produced here. We're very proud of what we accomplish in regular times. This is what we're shooting for, even amidst this current pandemic. And so what are we doing so that we can continue to see students achieve these results? And so I have a couple of key headlines, things to take that are gonna, high-level messages that I hope we can take from here. To reiterate what Jacques said, first of all, for any adults that are working with students, I know we have a lot of volunteers on this call, mentors that work with students in our programs. Remain calm. Really, we know that this is things look very different, but the best we can do is navigate this situation, try to end the year strong, and try to make sure that students are really using this time meaningfully. For our college partners, we know we have a lot of colleges on here. Every one of our students is going to need consistent messaging, reassurance, and in many cases, individual attention. And we're just asking that our colleges think about how they can structure and staff themselves to be able to do the one-on-one work that ultimately we believe is going to make the difference between students enrolling and not. And finally, for everyone, we know that this is all about one-on-one work. And there's no big silver bullet that's going to get us through this. It's just every single student one at a time, helping them find what they need. So as we've been going through with these key headlines, there have been some best practices that we've seen, things that have worked. And first is obviously rooted in the crisis. As college admissions counselors, as adults working with students, we really have to work up Maslow's hierarchy to make sure that students are getting access to the things that will ensure academic success. So, you know, if students don't have food, it's really our job, community partners, to help connect students with food pantries, for example. If students are worried that their families might be COVID positive, but they don't know because they don't have a way to get tested, we can help connect those and students with testing resources. So we really have to start there and work our way up and build upon that. And that's what YPIE is doing now. All of that is predicated on relationships. That's a key message from YPIE's work, that now is the time to lean into these relationships that we have with students, with community partners, and students are relying on those. And we need to be there knowing that relationships must be first. Next, those relationships will only be deepened by us being honest about the emotional roller coaster that students are facing, that adults, frankly, are facing. And that vulnerability to express how we're doing and ask students. It's really easy to jump. Let's just talk about the college essay. Let's just talk about your college list. But first, we really do need to make the space for that emotional reflection and give it space so students can feel more comfortable sharing, because everyone's going through something, regardless of their economic status. Next, we are knowing that students, whether they're in college or high school, could really use time organizing. And so our volunteers, our staff are taking a good amount of time to help students structure their time. We've heard actually from some college admissions officers that this is a test run for what college will be like, because students are having a lot more free time and have to do their work on their own schedule, much like they will in college. So how can we take this as an opportunity to practice some of those skills? Additionally, I would say this work is going to require multiple check-ins with students. And I'll give one anecdote. When this crisis first started and schools went remote, we reached out to every student and we heard a lot saying, yes, we have access to remote learning. We have a device at home. Well, now 5 weeks later, we've kept checking in, and it turns out that they might have one device for 4 or 5 people in the house. And so actually they do need to borrow a Chromebook. And we only learn that by multiple check-ins, because one and done is not going to work now. And finally, a key thing we're working with students on is having a good plan B and C. And I'll get into that more a little bit later, especially for our 12th graders and current college students. So now I just want to spend a couple of minutes looking at some of the things we're doing with students and questions we're hearing and how we're responding based on what we've learned with our current college students. Obviously, they're asking what's coming in the fall. We do not have a crystal ball, but one thing we are encouraging students to do is there was recently put out, and we'll be willing to share this after, 15 ways that the fall might look, 15 different scenarios. And so we're encouraging students to think about what's your plan B? If courses are online, if only freshmen are allowed on campus, if there's some other plan for the fall, what is your plan B? And making sure they're comfortable with that. Second, we know that finances are really top of mind. Students have lost, family members have lost jobs. Students have lost income as well. They might have had a summer job that they were hoping to make, $3,000 to close their EFC or something like that, that they're wondering now. And so what we're advising students is, and around what we're hearing from colleges are run by people. They want to be flexible, and it really takes students reaching out and advocating for themselves in this situation. And so we're encouraging that colleges hear that, and also that students reach out, because we know our admissions partners have asked for that. And then finally, we know that students are thinking a lot about how they can keep up with work. And so what we've been told by colleges and what we're directing students to do is really reach out to on-campus resources, the Writing Center, their professors. They are willing to help. And so oftentimes our students don't think they're entitled to reach out for those resources, but we need to make sure that we're reminding them that those are there for them still, even remotely. We'll again have time for questions, but I want to just continue moving to now 12th graders. The 12th graders we're working with, obviously now they're in a major time period of decision. And so what are we encouraging students to do now? First of all, we know some colleges have moved their typical May 1st decision deadline back. And so students should be consulting and looking to see when those deadlines are. Some are June 1st. And so NACAC actually has provided a great resource for that, to be able to look into that. Second, students should be thinking about the wait list a little bit differently. Some of our college partners have advised us that because the models they've had for predicting yield and who will enter college might not be as applicable this year, wait lists might look a little different, and there might be an opportunity to get off a wait list that might not have been there in previous years. We've also are encouraging students to put a deposit down. We believe it will be easier later to make a change than it will be to try to get into a school after they've missed the deposit deadline. And again, colleges have told us that they will be flexible, and we should be communicating with them. And so students should, again, know that they should do that. The biggest question we're asking about right now is summer melt. We know that in good times, a large portion of students, especially low-income first-generation students, who say they're going to school in June and never make it there in August. And especially with the uncertainty now, we need to be thinking about summer melt. So the YPIE staff have committed to working with students throughout the summer to make sure that they're transitioning, so that if they do have to fall back on their plan B, they're able to navigate that in real time with adult help. And so that's something that we're encouraging every partner to make themselves available over the summer. And we're thinking of it as a last mile push, so that students, especially in August, as decisions are having to be made and are being publicized by colleges, that we can help them navigate those. Finally, I mentioned about the fall already, make sure they have a plan B. And finally, I mentioned about finances. And so we are asking, I know I have an audience here of college admissions officers. I'm asking that you acknowledge and are increasingly flexible, knowing that what students might have submitted on their tax forms from last year or the prior year might not be reflective of their current family financial situation. And we've seen that, yes, there are appeals processes, but they are still somewhat cumbersome. And so we ask college partners to think about how that they can streamline that, acknowledging that there has been a lot of financial disruption in students' lives. We know you know that, but we hope that you can help us navigate that and help our students. And now just to look at our youngest group of students, our youngest high school group, our 9th and 10th and 11th graders, they're asking questions now like, what will the college process look like for me in 1, 2, or 3 years? Jayne will comment more on this in a moment, but I just wanted to share something we're hearing from admissions directors is that with the changes that have happened with standardized testing, with grading policies in schools, the holistic review process is going to be increasingly important and critical. You know, what students are doing during this time can reflect very positively on them as they go into the college admissions process. Now, we don't want students help caring for loved ones because it's going to be a good college essay. And frankly, we know students don't have that choice, but students should know that things like that can reflect very positively on the college admissions process in a year, 2 years, or 3 years. And finally, what should students be thinking about, this group of students be thinking about now? We want them to be finishing the year strong. That is the advice we've gotten from every admissions counselor we've talked to, every teacher we've talked to, every counselor in schools. Finish the year strong. It's hard, we know that, but everyone on this call is an adult who cares obviously about this issue, and we can make ourselves available to helping students end strong. And lastly, what students do now can be really meaningful. You know, in some ways, we're hoping this might be a way to level the playing field, because that expensive summer program that higher income families were paying for are canceled. And so everyone's sort of in a similar boat this summer in finding something meaningful to do. And so this could be an opportunity to really use that to have a more equitable process. And we're hoping that happens, and acknowledging that the inequities that our students and the challenges our students are facing are still immense and need us as caring adults to help them navigate. So just to, again, wrap up, for the adults, remain calm, finish strong. Let's use this time meaningfully with students. Colleges, please hear what our students are going through, especially around the financial interruption that they're encountering. And all of us, let's just take this one student at a time, because that's ultimately all that will make a difference. Big, vast initiatives will not work to get students through this process. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Jayne, and I thank you both again for being with us.
Great. Thank you, Sam, and thank you for all those comments. I hope I'm going to be able to elaborate on some of the points you've already made, and I think we'll find that our thinking and our suggestions for students and for professionals will dovetail together. I'd like to thank all of you for asking me to join you today. And thank you for all the important work that you are doing every day to support students in this unprecedented time. I was actually the first person in my family to go to college, and I was lucky enough to be raised in a family where there was a college-going culture and the means to be sure that I was prepared for that adventure. My dad was a veteran and a machinist. My mom was a nurse, and they were incredibly supportive in helping me to know that I could do anything I wanted to. That's the work that you're doing every day for these kids. And the truth is, these kids are our future. We need them to be the next group of scientists and economists to solve the next big problem. Hopefully there's another Anthony Fauci among them who's going to be around to deal with the next crisis we have. If I were college president, I'd put Anthony Fauci on my board right now, but the man has more important things to do, so we'll let him be. I'd like to start just by making a couple of comments about what I've been hearing my colleagues around the country talk about and say to students, whether they be college or high school professionals. And actually, this is good advice for us. Take a deep breath, be hopeful, be open-minded, be flexible about planning. Whether you're a student or a counselor, you need to have a flexible attitude about moving our lives forward. The future is still out there for all of these kids. It's just going to look different than they expected, and their path to get there is going to be different. But it is there, and as Sam has said on several occasions in his comments, there is not a high school or college professional out there who I have heard of who is not listening to what students are saying, being flexible in planning and advice, and making sure that there is as much transparency as possible in the information that all of us are sharing with kids. I know that there are a couple of issues that are really foremost on the minds, to some extent, of seniors and certainly to juniors. Standardized testing. So NACAC is encouraging our members to be flexible about how they will review applications for the class of 2021. Standardized testing options have not been as available this spring, and while there are conversations underway about what testing might look like in the fall, that could change depending on the guidance that we receive concerning health and safety and social distancing. So there are students who've not yet had an opportunity to take an SAT or an ACT, and that might be compromised in the fall also. But I think that what you'll hear from our college side colleagues is that they already are having conversations about what students' applications might look like and how they can take a holistic approach and look at all the other pieces of a student's application, especially in the absence of standardized testing or maybe with a minimum amount of testing. It doesn't mean that that assessment isn't going to be there. And it also, as Sam mentioned, to some extent, it levels the playing field. Now, I say that cautiously because there are already many thousands of students who are underrepresented in this process, and this is even a greater challenge for them. But everyone in this process now is limited in terms of these opportunities. And I think that all of us will seize this opportunity to look at what those application criteria are going to look like next year and how they can be fair and equitable for every student. Colleges will change how they might look at essays as well. And I'll talk about that a little in a minute, but the essay is our student's story. And for each student, that story may be about the pandemic, it may be about something else, but it's still about a genuine, well-written, heartfelt story. And I know that there are many of us out there that will continue to work with students to help them to put pen to paper and develop their own stories. There are questions about, so what about activities and what about resumes? Well, again, I've already seen some great letters from colleges and universities acknowledging that our students might not have the lead in the spring musical. You might not be an Intel science champion. You might not set an athletic record at the state level in track or field. But the truth is no one is going to do those things this year. Again, creating another level playing field and giving students an opportunity to look at that a little bit differently and tell their story as it exists. There is no one, I don't think, who will be penalized for not having all of those same markers that they might have had 2 or 3 years ago. And I think their stories will still be rich. They are just going to be different. And we'll all be looking for different criteria to help us to be able to see the leadership skills and the experiences that those kids are developing as long as their academic preparation for being a college student. Sam talked a little bit also about underclass students. What should 9th, 10th, and 11th graders be doing right now? As much as I know how different it is to be sitting at home rather than sitting in a classroom, these are certainly kids who are well engaged with the internet. And I'm sure there are many conversations going on with their parents about how they're using their screen time. But I'd encourage kids to stay the course with whatever the learning platform is in their school or their district, and to try to embrace the learning as much as they possibly can, even though it looks different. I also hope that kids will take advantage of this time to read for fun. My students over the years could probably tell you that one of the things that I've said to them over and over again, voracious readers make great writers and more informed citizens. So in addition to what you're doing online for your school's requirements, I hope kids will take advantage of this time to read all the books they've never gotten to, all the books that their teachers have suggested to them over the year, because it really is going to inform their lens as to how they look at the world. How will kids distinguish themselves without standardized tests, with grades being less stable than they have been, without extracurricular activities? So first of all, in terms of the grading, many of you know that high schools always provide profiles, a roadmap, so that the college side folks can see what goes on in that high school, what course opportunities do students have, how is GPA calculated. And I know that high schools are busy working to be sure that their profile has some sort of addendum to explain how they're computing final grades, how that impacts GPA. So I'd want students to know that their story will be represented and that colleges will have what they need to interpret the grades that are being provided. I would encourage students not to resist the impulse to overcompensate. Again, students are each going to have their own story. They may consider service opportunities during this time. They may be creative about how they interact with people in their community while having to do that at a social distance. Acknowledging that you're living in a world where the spring you anticipated or the summer you anticipated is just not going to be that way. Again, encouraging these students to be sad about that and mourn that loss, and then move forward with plans about how they're going to use this time. Sam commented a little bit on what to expect on campus this fall. And as Sam said, there are as many as 15 different variation of plans out there. I hear conversations from my college colleagues, like many of you on the call. I know those conversations are taking place. And I think the more that you all are able to share your evolving plans with schools, with high schools, with students, you're providing a message. And we all know what happens when there is no message or there is no information. The information is made up or developed, and we certainly want to try to be transparent and avoid that particular curve in the trail. I would encourage, as Sam did, to have kids be very transparent about having a couple of plans. Where did I want to go to school with before this happened? Do I still want to go there if that school opens on a virtual platform for a while? Do I still want to go there, and can I still afford the cost of attendance given the change in my family's circumstances? If not, what is Plan C? So among families and among all of you as counselors and admissions officers, I've been encouraging students not to be afraid to ask those questions, because there are people there to answer them. I guess finally, as I wrap up and we get to questions, NACAC has tried to be proactive about providing information to professionals and to students about all of these changes that are happening every day. At the end, we'll make sure that you have a slide that has a link to the NACAC webpage. We started right away with 2 platforms. One, where our college members are providing information about the goings-on on their campus. We started with, are you open? Are you teaching virtually? Are you offering virtual tours and virtual admitted students programs? And we've been adding to that in real time information about financial aid and plans for the fall. On the high school, and that is a tool for high school kids and high schools to look at to see what's going on. On the high school side, we've asked counselors to post information in the beginning. Is your school open? Are you in session? Will you be grading? And then additional questions. Can you provide transcripts electronically? Can you tell us more about your grading practice for the end of the year? Again, a one-stop place for our college members to look and see what's going on with their high school partners. We're adding to that in real time. We're getting ready to launch some additional virtual platforms for professionals and for students. And we look forward to being one of the leading resources to provide information and counsel to everyone who's impacted by all these changes in the transition to higher education. So I think that I will pause there, because I know and I hope that there are questions out there that we can try to address and chat about with each other. Jacques?
Thank you, Jayne, and thank you, Sam. And we do, and thanks to those of you who've been asking questions in the question box. We have a number of them. As we transition to those questions, Jayne and Sam, I just want to first follow up on a point you both made. Sam said, keep calm. Jayne, you said, breathe. All good advice. Imagine for those who on the call who are volunteer mentors on behalf of YPIE, and let's say for our case study, they've got a parent of a rising senior who's at their door, so to speak, and it's the perfect storm. All the things you mentioned, grades have gone past fail in the spring. The extracurriculars, as Jayne mentioned, aren't happening. Maybe they're having difficulty accessing a standardized test or even information about it. Starting with you, Jayne, I'm struck by your mental health background and also your college counseling background. How can the volunteer mentors on the call instill that sense of calm and breath?
You know, Jack, I think that's a great question, and it's a challenge to all of us to try to provide a scenario to students and parents that acknowledges that this is not what they expected it would be. It is sad that there may not be in-person graduations, but even more than that, it is frightening to think that family health has been impacted, family income has been impacted, and that parents are sad that they're not able to provide their students with that next step that they had hoped for, So I think part of your work as volunteers is to try to acknowledge the sadness that's going on there, but help kids and families to move on and say, okay, this is not what I expected, but what can I do? What do I have control over? And so as seniors and parents are thinking about their next steps for attendance, I would encourage them to be very honest with each other about financial realities, because I think one of the most frightening things to do right now would be to get into debt to try to accomplish what they thought might be the perfect response. Consider staying closer to home. Consider community college education as a way to begin. There are lots of tangible suggestions, but again, I think the work is finding this balance between acknowledging the disappointment and the sadness and moving on to Plan B and Plan C, so that that college education can begin in the fall in whatever way is most feasible for them.
Sam, coming back to your point about CALM, as you charge your volunteer mentors, what are some of the ways, piggybacking on what Jayne said, that you will sort of help them instill a sense of calm amidst some very daunting reality?
Yeah, well, we're seeing that, and I think part of the work is creating the space and vulnerability of ourselves to say, this is how we're feeling, and then allowing that space for students to express that. I think, we all are having up and down days, and letting students in on that and letting them open up about how they're experiencing that is really important. And one other thing that I think might be somewhat valuable is keeping the goal in sight, that ultimately we at YPIE, we believe that the data shows that a college education is the greatest tool to upper mobility. That's ultimately where we want to get. And the how, the winding path might change a little bit now, but keeping that sort of North Star there is really important, I think, and orients students and volunteers and families to say, okay, we still are going in a direction that we want to be in. We're just going to maybe have to, I think Michelle Obama called it a swerve, swerve a little bit around to get to that, and keeping rooted in that's really important, and hopefully ground students a little bit to calm down, still see the light at the end of the tunnel there.
Thank you. So let's turn to our participants' questions, and we'll be bouncing around a bit. And thank you, panelists, and also thank you, those of you in our audience, for bearing with us as we scroll through the questions in the box. The first question I'll read is from Amy. She asks, what do you think about writing about one's experiences during the COVID lockdown in the essays? Picking up in part on Jayne's reference to essays. I would expand the question slightly to writing about the pandemic in general as an essay prompt. Jayne, as our resident college counselor, why don't you take the first stab at that?
My experience has been that the best essays are well-written, genuine, heartfelt stories that students want to share with admissions officers. When those of you who are admission officers read files, you see tangible pieces. You see grades and test scores, you see extracurricular experiences, you read recommendations, but the place where students have the ability to come alive and introduce themselves to you are in the essays. So I think every student will need to decide for him or herself, what part of me do I want to introduce to the college admissions office that you have not yet gotten to know in my application? And if that story has to do with the experience with them, their family, their community during this pandemic, then by all means they should tell that story. But for other students, there may be other pieces of their history and their story that they consider to be more compelling and more important to their growth as an individual. So they may opt to write in that direction. And that would be equally important. as telling a story specifically about a pandemic experience.
Thank you. A different question from John Eric Aguilar. If enough students decide not to go away for school in the fall or not attend a more expensive private college or university, what supports will be in place, or what are possible plan suggestions for state colleges, community colleges, as they have a bigger influx of students? Sam, you touched on this a little bit, that one of the ways of instilling that sense of calm may be to recalibrate a little bit and perhaps go to school closer to home, at least perhaps initially, or at least to consider that thinking. Do you have a sense yet from your perch at YPIE what might be happening within the SUNY system and the CUNY system to provide some reinforcement?
So I would just reiterate that students having a plan B that's a little bit more of a local option is a really strong one. You know, we don't know that families might say come July, the crisis hasn't subsided enough. You know, we don't feel comfortable with you going out of state or upstate or something like that and staying closer. So having that as a backup option, you know, I can say it's a little bit of the Wild West right now, what schools are considering. You know, we've talked to some folks at CUNY who have seen a really strong yield already, large influx of students who are accepting offers to the CUNY system. And I think like everyone, they're going to have to figure out how to accommodate those students and whether that'll be on campus or remote or a mix. So I think there's more to be seen there, and we just don't know yet.
So question from David Marcus. I believe this is the author and former journalist, David Marcus. Can you talk about gap year options for high school and college students? Sam, for this first scenario, let's talk about that student who's been admitted to college for the fall. Parents or students is concerned about what that experience is going to look like and the instability of it. And that student or parent comes to YPIE with advice on whether and how to take a gap year.
One of the things we've been encouraged to do by admissions officers is, if you're intending to take a gap year, put a deposit down, make a decision to do that, but don't just kick the can for a year and say, I'll deal with this in a year, because we know your chances of coming back, if you don't have a spot saved or have made an official deferral for a year, it makes it much harder to do that. So one of the things we're encouraging students is that might be where we get to in July and August. But for now, it would be wise to make a deposit, make a decision, and you could always defer later once you've kept your foot in the door.
Jayne, wearing your college counseling hat, certainly an interesting year for a student to come to your office asking about the possibility of a gap year. What advice would you provide?
I would echo some of Sam's comments that it is crucial and it's so important to make that deposit and give students a little bit of time to make a final decision in July or August, and to be sure to communicate by whatever process is in place at that school to pursue your intention to take a year deferral if that's what you're choosing to do. It's so interesting to me to hear the words gap year used to cover such a wider gamut of possibilities. It's not just to have a chance to do an internship for a year or to be part of a service or a mission project, but for many kids it may become a family or a financial reality that they would like to take this year. I think the piece that I would add to Sam's comments is to encourage students and families, if financial costs are the issue, please be sure to explore all the possibilities with the school at which you'd like to enroll, as well as other local options that you might have at the community college, because it may be a gap year that you're looking for, or it may be a less expensive alternative or an alternative closer to home that will meet your needs, that's the case, that's what you're looking for. Lots of different layers to this.
And I think an important point to emphasize, while this is a year where a gap year might look compelling, the college, I suspect, is going to want to know, to your point, not only the why, but the what. What are you going to do with that year? And that also becomes challenging at a time of pandemic, finding a meaningful experience.
It does, and I'd also like to acknowledge the place that puts our college admission colleagues in. I know that every one of you wants to help kids as much as you possibly can, but you also have institutional responsibilities, and somewhere you have some institutional guidance about how many students you can defer for a year. You can't defer an entire class because there are juniors coming behind them who want to apply to your institutions next year. So I wanted to acknowledge that that's a challenge for our college partners, and put that thought out there for all of you working with high school students, that's a reality that the admissions offices have to face responsibly.
So question from Eileen Fusco to put our panelists on the spot for a moment. What is the best website to go to for virtual college tours? And we can amend that to what are some good resources online for students, families, and counselors and mentors looking for virtual college tours?
So in particular for virtual college tours, a lot of colleges have it on their own website. And that's a really, some of them are very robust, and you can do it that way. You know, we heard some admissions officers talking not so long ago about how this is an experiment for them to see how they can do this online, and they might find that they never want to go back to the big open info sessions that they were doing. And so some colleges are doing online info sessions now. Admissions officers have made it really clear to us that if you reach out to them, you can have a conversation with them. These are real people on the other side. They're not a computer. And so you want to do a virtual tour, the website. You want to get real information, email these folks, and they've been pretty responsive, and we've seen that to our students.
Look, I think it's going to require some creativity, some digging, some almost journalistic digging. There is a website called YouVisit, youvisit.com, that has virtual tours of over 600 colleges and universities, I believe. This is not should not be considered an endorsement of YouVisit, but it might be a site worth looking at. Jayne, any other resources you would recommend?
I don't have any other specific resources other than to encourage you to go to individual schools' websites. I have been so impressed with the way the colleges really stepped out in front, made sure that students and faculty were safe, and immediately stepped up their game with virtual tools. I think you're going to continue to see websites develop that will attempt to centralize some of these resources. That's one of the things that we're trying to do as part of the NACAC landing page, and we're certainly aware of trying to be sure that beyond the virtual tours, that we are looking for a platform to provide information on a virtual platform about all the bits and pieces of college admissions, not just the tours, but essay writing and particular types of schools and particular types of admission process. So making sure that what students might have heard in in-person conversations will also be available to counselors and students on a virtual platform.
So shifting gears, a question, how will EOP and HEOP summer programs work this summer? And the questioner says, I'm seeing many colleges have already moved to online learning for summer classes. And Sam, erring on the side of not assuming knowledge among our participants, can you just briefly define EOP and HEOP and then perhaps take a stab at the question?
Sure. So EOP and HEOP are New York programs. They're opportunity programs that are designed to help students, many like the students in YPIE, transition and gets extra supports when they're in college, some financial, but mostly services that will support them. We love, at YPIE, we love those programs. They provide great support to students. We see better outcomes with them. You know, a key part of that is their summer work that they do to build a community among students. And we know that that's not going to happen this year. I think we're waiting to hear how colleges are going to create that feeling of community and camaraderie that's so important in those programs. One of the things we've been encouraged to do by some CUNY admissions officers is how can we create those mini communities ourselves, knowing that we still know the students, and supplement that community building over the summer, so that when they go to campus, you know, it's that sort of posse model, they go together. Does it replace an EOP or HEOP program? Absolutely not, but it's maybe the best we'll be able to do to create that feeling of community.
So Jayne, do you want to pan back for a moment from a New York specific program to these sorts of programs in general?
Well, certainly these programs happen around the country and around the world, and they play a vital role in helping students transition from high school into college. And behind the scenes, I know that our colleagues in student affairs are beginning to think about how can they recreate these programs. Again, going back to the thought that it's our role as the professionals here to help students to understand that their opportunity is still there, but we're trying to figure out how to recreate everything from that camaraderie going in to the warmth of a seminar conversation that you think about having with a faculty member on a college campus. I think the reality is that this is all going to be different for a while as we recover from this pandemic. And my hat is off to the people that are just scrambling to put these revised programs up online to support students. I know that's going on around the country, and I'm grateful for the sake of students that that's going to continue to be available in a different way.
Okay, so a tough question for you both. I will preface this from one of our participants. They're asking a philosophical question and asking you to put on a bit of an op-ed hat and express an opinion. Do you think it is reasonable for students to pay the same tuition fees for distance learning as in-person learning? Even if the student has significant financial aid, most of our students do have an unmet balance settled through family contribution and or student loans. Jayne, you're the president of an organization with 15,000 members. Many of them are colleges that run the gamut, but also college counselors and community-based organizations as well. How have you started to sort of think about this issue of value and pricing for an experience that's different than what one initially signed up for?
I think that's a great question, Jacques, and I have been thinking about it. You know, even though my background is in mental health, in college counseling, my work has been primarily with high school students and their families. A significant amount of our membership are my colleagues on the college and university side. So when I look at it through their lens, I know that the university has costs. They still need to pay the faculty salaries, provide the IT platforms to make this learning work, pay the salaries of all of their staff who support these efforts, have library services available to the faculty, have research resources available. All those things are costs on the college side, and those costs don't just disappear when the education is provided on a virtual platform. That's their challenge, and they need to meet their institutional budget requirements. At the same time, I'm sensitive to questions from parents who wonder about the value of a significant cost for an online education versus an in-person experience. Families have to consider what the best way is to spend their education dollars, so I understand their questions. I don't have an answer. I just know that there are valid concerns on both sides that I hope we can all listen to, and then help each family to figure out what the best path forward is for them.
Sam, if a
Sam?
parent in Yonkers came to you with a question like that, hey, I thought we were signing up for a brick and mortar experience, and now my child's going to be getting this education from their bedroom on a computer that maybe we have, maybe we don't, but we're paying the same other than room and board. How do you address that question?
Well, just as a sidebar, if they don't have a computer, they should come to YPIE because we're lending them out. I know the district is as well, and we'll help them get online. Aside from that, I have to agree with Jayne. I see both sides. I do wonder if there are things, first of all, if colleges can do more to close the gaps. We know that students might have a $2,000–3,000 gap they were hoping to close with a work-study program that might not exist, or a summer job. If colleges could help close that gap, that might be, to them, a more cost-effective way than reducing tuition later. There's different pools of money for that financial aid. I also wonder if they are still paying the same, can they get more for what they're getting, even if it's online? So they're taking an online course for X dollars. Could they get more credit, accumulate more credits for that? So even if they can't reduce the cost, there is a way that students can sort of make up for it, and students might be able then to work their way quicker through credit accumulation. Are there creative ways to help students get more of what they're paying, more of a value? And if a parent came to me, frankly, it's a really hard decision. It's a really, really personal decision that every family is going to have to make individually with deeply imperfect information, as all of us have. And I think, rather than telling families, here's what you should do, it's really just hearing them. And one of the things we prioritize is listening for our volunteers. They know the volunteers have gone to our YPIE trainings, and our staff. It's really about listening to families and hearing what their concerns are. And maybe we'll have answers to those, and maybe we won't. And that's okay. And acknowledging we don't have answers to those is okay. But putting them in the driver's seat to ask is what I would say we should prioritize.
We've got time for one last question. And again, for those of you whose questions I was not able to read, we will do our best over the next couple of days to at least attempt to answer them, or let you know whether we think it can be answered. Here's a question. Are you advising students to take the SAT in August at home if that is offered? And I'd love you both to speak to it, and I defer to which of you wants to take that one on first.
Yeah, I mean, so we're going to tackle that as it comes. We know that the spring tests were canceled. Yes, the August would be a good option. We don't know what those online tests are going to exactly look like, or what security looks like for those, and for some students who are dealing with childcare, managing their for their siblings, that could pose a challenge. But because of the test optional rules, to take it in August and see how it turns out isn't a bad thing. In Yonkers, normally they give the SAT to all students in October during the school day. We'll have to see. Hopefully school is open then, and that's continuing as well.
Jayne, anything you would add in terms of advice on that at-home SAT?
Again, just as with the prior question, this is an individual decision for students and families, and I know in your community, they're going to have counselors and volunteers to help them figure out what the best thing is for them. All things being equal, I would certainly encourage students to take advantage of a testing opportunity, but I think I'd be remiss in not saying that I hope all of us who are involved with the access to that testing and the ability to take that testing in a safe, equitable format is something that all of us need to keep advocating for our students.
Thank you. And this brings us to a close. I know we could go on for much longer. I also know participants, we've thrown a lot of information at you. I hope that you can take some time to sort of take Sam and Jayne's advice to breathe and to instill that sense of calm, and to know that this may take some creativity on your part and some resilience on your part as volunteer mentors, but there are lots of resources for you. We can make these slides available to you in addition to this webcast, but Jayne has provided you with her email address. I've provided you with mine. You've got Sam's as well. Jayne mentioned the website of NACAC, and it's listed here on nacacnet.org. And there is a coronavirus landing page that has a number of excellent resources from our colleagues at NACAC, and those resources are evolving. So keep checking in as they add bells and whistles. There's so many people at YPIE that we want to thank, and I'm hesitant to single out any in particular, but I do want to single out two. Ellen Cutler-Levy is the Senior Director of Partnerships at YPIE, and she helped us put this together in terms of our run of show and our charge and our objectives. And I want to thank Ailish Klein, who's the Director of Operations at YPIE, who I've been referring to today as our executive producer. This would not have happened technologically without Ailish's expertise. And with that, we wish you a good rest of the day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.